New Orleans Saints center Erik McCoy gets the bag, and now maybe that CJ Gardner-Johnson trade makes a little bit more sense. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always. Make Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at BetOnline, who have more odds, lines, and props than ever before as the NFL season kicks off. BetOnline, where the game starts. On today's episode, we're going to bring back beignets and parlays and get you ready for the weekend of betting ahead. We're also going to take a look at the New Orleans Saints. Big deal, of course, for starting center and second round draft selection from a few years ago in Erik McCoy, and of course get you updated on the injury report as well. But I want to start with Erik McCoy here, who was given a $63.25 million contract extension over the course of the next 5 years. And now all of a sudden, the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade makes sense for exactly one of the reasons that we thought it would make sense. Remember, the New Orleans Saints are taking on a big loss by trading away CJ Gardner-Johnson. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But according to reports, CJ and the New Orleans Saints were about $4 million apart when it comes to contract negotiations. What does that tell you? That tells you that the New Orleans Saints are still the New Orleans Saints, right? That position by position, they have a price that they're willing to pay based upon what that role is. We've seen it with Jimmy Graham. We've seen it with Brandon Cooks. We've seen it with Mark Ingram, and even just saw it most recently with a guy like Latavius Murray last year, who was setting up to be maybe even the third running back, because the Saints really liked what they had in Tony Jones Jr., and he wouldn't take a pay cut, so the New Orleans Saints cut him loose, gave him an opportunity to go somewhere else where he could get the role that he wanted, and that they didn't have to pay for the role that they didn't want to pay for. Now, did that end up being the right decision? Not necessarily. And that's not to say that CJ Gardner-Johnson is the right decision either, right? Having traded him away. But if you think about the fact that the New Orleans Saints are about $4 million apart, now the New Orleans Saints, as of this morning, sit at about, $2.8 million left on their salary cap. The idea of extending Erik McCoy seems to have been something that would have played a role in their ability to extend a CJ Gardner-Johnson, knowing that they have Erik McCoy, that they have Paulson Adebo down the road, that they have, or Marcus Davenport potentially after this season as well. There are players at the New Orleans Saints are going to be looking to extend this season, this offseason. Erik McCoy did not have a fifth-year option. He was a second-round selection. There is no fifth year available to them in his contract. So getting an extension done with him early rather than later should end up paying off quite a bit, much like it paid off with Ryan Ramczyk, much like it paid off with Teron Armstead back in the day, and others. So for the New Orleans Saints, this is a great move for them. I think that Erik McCoy, inarguably, is one of the top 5 players at his position in the NFL, but also one of the top 5 players on this New Orleans Saints roster. You think about the players that no one talked about the entirety of the offseason. Erik McCoy is one of those guys. Why? Because he's so solidly proficient and he is so consistently successful that you don't talk about him. Because usually when it comes to an offensive lineman, as Dennis Allen told us, the one time that I asked him about Erik McCoy, you talk about offensive linemen when they're in trouble. And we haven't talked about Erik McCoy at all. This New Orleans Saints team made the right decision keeping their starting center. They've made it look easy over the course of the past few years, moving on from one center to Max Unger, moving on from Max Unger to Erik McCoy. You don't always get that lucky when it comes to your starting center, especially now that the center has a little bit more responsibility in New Orleans. You don't have a veteran quarterback that's got 15, 16 years of experience in the system that's making all of the checks and all the calls at the line of scrimmage. That role is very likely now split between Erik McCoy and Jameis Winston, who's only got a couple of years in the system. So you don't want to risk losing that good a center. You don't want to risk losing a center that knows your system so well. You don't want to risk losing a center that can be a game changer for you, whether it's because he's making those calls and making them accurately, or is, all the way downfield, 60 yards downfield or so, making blocks so that Alvin Kamara can get into the end zone on a screen pass. So I think the Saints, this is a massive win for them to be able to lock down Erik McCoy on a contract for 5 years. And this is a true 5-year contract, right? We're talking about, what is it, $12.75 million per year. Like, that's what it is. And so this is a true contract for Erik McCoy. $40 million guaranteed over the 5 years. Big deal for Erik McCoy, big deal for the New Orleans Saints, and a successful move, yet again, by Dennis Allen and Mickey Loomis and this front office. So great stuff there. But I do think that it gives you a little bit of clarity in terms of why the New Orleans Saints had to make the hard decision of moving on from CJ Gardner-Johnson, knowing that they were so far apart in their contract negotiations, and then now seeing this contract extension, this all makes a little bit more sense. All right, y'all, coming up next, Michael Thomas still limited on the injury report, but if you've been listening or watching lately, you know that this is exactly what you should have expected. If you're catching your first episode here, let me tell you why that's the case. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn, who do everything that they can over at LinkedIn Jobs to make sure that you are interviewing the quality candidates that you want to, and faster. I might use LinkedIn Jobs here soon to hire an assistant or something, because I'm doing a lot of stuff and I can use a little bit of help. So look out for that Locked On Saints posting on LinkedIn Jobs, and why would I use LinkedIn Jobs? I'd use it because it's the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. I mean, 810 million people. I'm guaranteed to find somebody that loves this team, that loves this show, and that wants to help out, right? Like, I'm guaranteed to find somebody. I'm just kidding. I wish I had the money to pay for help, but I don't. So in that case, I'm just going to sit here and struggle and wish that I could use LinkedIn Jobs. And over at LinkedIn Jobs, you're able to do a bunch of stuff. You can put up your posts. You can set up that purple hashtag hiring frame on your LinkedIn profile to help spread the word a little bit. And then you get to use simple tools like screening questions and stuff like that to make sure that you are interviewing the candidates that you want to, that have the right skills and experience, so that you can quickly prioritize those folks. And it's why small businesses voted LinkedIn Jobs the #1 spot when it comes to delivering quality hires versus the leading candidates. LinkedIn Jobs will help you find the candidates that you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? I can't think of 40 million anything aside. You know what? No, that's how many dollars are guaranteed in Erik McCoy's new contract. There you go. Post your job for free over at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. The New Orleans Saints released their Thursday injury report, and it is the exact same as Wednesday's injury report. Basically, exactly what we expected. But fingers were crossed that maybe a guy like Paulson Adebo would elevate from did not participate to limited. But unfortunately, Dwayne Washington, as well as Traquan Smith, all remain with the DNP designation. Guys like Michael Thomas and, of course, JT Gray and Erik McCoy, who just got the big contract extension. Those guys all listed as limited, but I'm not really worried about the limited guys right now. And I'll explain why. And this goes for Michael Thomas in particular, but also some of the other guys like Erik McCoy, who they just gave a big contract extension to, which goes to show you that whatever the injury is, the calf injury that he's dealing with, it ain't a big deal, clearly, if you're going to give him, $40 million guaranteed on Thursday, right? So with all of that in place, what you can look at is that the New Orleans Saints over the course of the entire the entire offseason so far have been cautious when it comes to injuries. Michael Thomas was getting the ramp up. Ryan Ramczyk getting the ramp up. James Hurst getting the ramp up. Who else? Guys like Taysom Hill getting the ramp up, right? That's what they've been doing this entire offseason. So this to me doesn't feel like it's anything different than that. Doesn't feel like it's anything specific or unique or vastly concerning in comparison to what we've seen over the course of the offseason thus far. The New Orleans Saints have basically told us the right things as we've gone through. And of course, we're always kind of listening for when Dennis Allen says sooner rather than later. Maybe he's caught on that we've caught on to that here recently. And maybe that's why he's not saying it as much. But I got to tell you, so far, so good in terms of what the New Orleans Saints have been doing. And I think that a lot of people look at this New Orleans Saints roster and they look at the injured reserve list that includes guys like DeMarco Jackson and Smoke Monday and others, and as well as Bryce Thompson now. And right now you've got guys like Malcolm Roach and Trevor Penning there. And they say, whoa, I thought that they were supposed to get better at managing soft tissue injuries and things like that. Some of these aren't soft tissue injuries, like the Trevor Penning injury, for instance, which maybe is the one of greatest detriment thus far, where it was an impact injury, right? It was an impact injury with Bryce Thompson. We saw it happen, right? It was an impact injury with a guy like Malcolm Roach. So for these guys that are managing some of the soft tissue injuries, like we've seen Pete Werner limited, we've seen Michael Thomas limited, Erik McCoy limited, JT Gray limited, all of their designations are things like calf, hamstring, the soft tissue, so groin, right? It's all been soft tissue stuff. And so that's where you can see the New Orleans Saints being better at managing these things by giving these guys a limited practice as opposed to rushing them back out on the field, knowing that a lot of these guys can plug right into the system and everything. Erik McCoy, Michael Thomas, JT Gray, and I would even go so far as to say Pete Werner can all plug into the system on Sunday and be okay. So they're there. They're doing walkthroughs. They're doing, some of those like individual drills and things like that, mostly stuff that's like low impact and all. That you're going to see a different approach to injuries, which everyone expected, right? Going into and throughout the 2022 NFL season from the New Orleans Saints with Matt Rhea at the helm. And I think that that's a good thing. So I wouldn't be concerned, even at this point, that Michael Thomas is limited for a second day in a row. Remember, we said that, right? We said it's very likely that he'll be limited Wednesday and Thursday. If you get a full participation from him on Friday, that's a fantastic sign. Don't get me wrong. But even then, he would still be questionable going into the game. I can almost guarantee it. And then the Saints would make the call on Saturday or Sunday. Just like the Atlanta Falcons are going to make the call on Drake London Sunday morning, which don't kid yourselves, right? It's going to be that he's going to participate in the game because we see this all the time. High-profile wide receiver going up against the New Orleans Saints. Oh, he's not going to be able to play. And then he plays. He always plays. They always play every time. And I think you'll see the same thing when it comes to Michael Thomas. You could see me slowly falling into a state of unwellness around the idea of the wide receivers going up against the New Orleans Saints, who seem to be like the miracle cure for all wide receivers. So I think you'll see that's what you're going to see. You're going to see the cautious approach from this New Orleans Saints team, and that is a good thing. Everyone said that the way that the New Orleans Saints were hit by injuries last year was a bad thing. It absolutely was. This is how to make sure that doesn't happen to you again, by not rushing guys back and by understanding that there are certain players that if you ain't got to get them back out on the field in full participation and have them running full speed before Sunday, then don't put them out on the field in full participation and running full speed before Fridays. There's no reason, or before Sundays. There's no reason to do that. So that's why I'm not concerned at all when it comes to the injury for Michael Thomas. And I'm hardly concerned at this point when it comes to guys like Pete Werner and James Hurst, who's been full participation all week anyway, Erik McCoy and some of these other guys that are limited. Traquan Smith, Dwayne Washington, Paulson Adebo. A little bit more concerned about the guys that haven't participated in practice than I am about those who were limited. Now, it'd be great to see Paulson Adebo, find a way to pop back up and get out there. But hey, even if he's not able to, you put Bradley Roby outside. He had a fantastic camp. He had 6 interceptions from the outside throughout training camp, where the majority of those snaps at least came from the outside. You got PJ Williams, who revitalized his career the first time by playing in the slot. I think a lot of people are concerned about him playing on the outside because of Calvin Ridley and those things. He ain't going to play on the outside. He'll play in the slot. And so with that, that's where he revitalized his career. That's the pick 6 against the Minnesota Vikings. That's him in run support. That's him getting the sacks on third downs. That's what PJ Williams does in the slot. That's good. It's not elite play. It's not all pro play, but that's what happens when you play in the nickel, right? You're not going to get that type of recognition. It's a low impact, quote unquote, position, according to the NFL. So with that being the case, you're fine. You're fine. The New Orleans Saints are uniquely prepared to be able to handle injuries because of their depth in the secondary in particular. They'll be fine. Coming up next, Beignets and Parlays is back. I'm so happy that it's back. BetOnline, we're going to go through the odds that you need to know, where you should consider betting over the course of this opening game against the Atlanta Falcons. And you already know I'm overly confident when it comes to this game, and that might be my downfall. It doesn't have to be yours. Judge for yourself. But first, let me tell you about our friends over at BetOnline, the #1 source for all of your sports gambling needs. That includes sports betting podcasts, sports betting articles, more odds, lines, and props on the website than ever before. Everything that you can ever imagine is there. You want lines for this game as well as all of the other games going on across the NFL, you can find them there. For instance, here, let's start with this because we've got a Thursday night game that you might not see this before Thursday night, so forgive me. But Buffalo Bills are favored -2.5, -2.5 going into this game. I've got the Bills winning this game. It's just so strange to see a Super Bowl champion as an underdog to start the season. That's how good the Buffalo Bills are. I think that they'll take this game, and I think that they'll cover. You disagree? Let me know. Go put some money down if you're confident. Feeling froggy elite? No, I'm just playing. But anyway, go and check them out. BetOnline, your place for all the odds, lines, and props, everything that you're looking for. It's BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with beignets and parlays. And beignets and parlays is now sponsored by BetOnline, your go-to spot for all the odds, lines, and props that you need. BetOnline, where the game starts. So the New Orleans Saints are traveling to Atlanta as minus 5.5 point favorites. 5.5 point favorites going into this game on the road. The home team usually gets 3 points, y'all. So that means that Vegas looks at the New Orleans Saints as like an 8.5 point favorite going into this one. But 5.5 points is the official line. I don't know that the New Orleans Saints are going to cover. I'm going to just be honest. Like the mobile quarterback thing, the ball control thing that I think is going to be present in this game, I can see the New Orleans Saints winning, but by less than 5. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's a late touchdown when they were winning like 24-13 or something like that. And then a late touchdown makes it 24-20. That kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So for the New Orleans Saints, I personally think that 5.5 spread is a little bit too wide for them, but I do take them to still win this game. The money line in this one is minus 220 when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. So just to kind of like further define that as we go through these, in case you're not super familiar with gambling or betting, but you want to know a little bit more. Basically, if you are at minus 220, you put down, let's say $10, you're going to walk away with an extra $4.50 if you put that bet down. So the New Orleans Saints heavily favored in this one. The better bet in terms of money, but not smart bet, is to actually bet on the Atlanta Falcons when it comes to the money line, because you put $10 down there, you can walk away with $19 in winning. So they're underdogs, so you would win more money that way. So that's just the way that this all works out, but I'm still putting my money on New Orleans. The over-under is at 43, and I know I just mentioned the final score of 24-20, which is technically a 44-point final score, but I could easily see this game being like 17-14. So if the over-under for total points scored is 43, kind of think you go under in this game. I think this is going to be a lot of ball control, y'all. I don't think this is going to be flashy fireworks and stuff like that. I would love if it was, don't get me wrong, but even the New Orleans Saints put up the flashy fireworks to open up the season last year, and there was only 41 points scored in that game. Now, of course, that was because the Green Bay Packers only scored 3 points. Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers, I'm talking to you. But the New Orleans Saints in this game, I don't think you're going to see that. I think it's going to be a lot of ball control. It's going to be a lot of running. Everything with Alvin Kamara. It's going to be a lot of what you're looking for in terms of like what the defense is able to do and how the defense impacts. And I think like that's your key to victory in this game, right? More than 150 rushing yards, a stout defense, and then winning the time of possession by a half a quarter, right? 7.5 minutes, something like that, right? Or yeah, 7.5 minutes. So if all that happens and the New Orleans Saints win the game because of that, it's going to be a low scoring game because that's by virtue of the numbers, right, at that point that make this a winnable game for the New Orleans Saints. It's a winnable game going in nonetheless, but that is the thing that will allow them to like seal the victory. I'm curious to see how much we see Michael Thomas play. I wish I had player props here, but I'm curious to see how much Michael Thomas is going to play and, you know, how many opportunities he's going to get. I personally think that if he plays, and this might be a little bold, but I personally think that if he plays, he gets at least 6 catches in this game. And I think he's going to be targeted heavily. I don't think they're going to take their time getting Michael Thomas started. I don't think Michael Thomas wants to take his time getting started. You know what I mean? And that doesn't mean that he has to do a whole bunch of stuff about getting like mixy in the middle, as Brandon Olsen would say. But it does mean that, you know, he's getting some of those quick passes. He's moving the ball on first down. He's getting you that plus yardage that the New Orleans Saints are accustomed to getting from him on those downs, which allow them to stay ahead of the clock, ahead of the plan, right? Which then allows them to take advantage of the clock. And so all of that gets you to a place where you're talking about a lower scoring game, which is not a bad thing at all. In fact, one of the things that you can find here at BetOnline is the margin of victory in the first half. And the odds on favorite for that at plus 325 is that the Saints go into halftime winning by 13 points or more. So if you get to that spot where you've got 17 points to, let's say, 3, and then you get maybe a late charge by the Atlanta Falcons or a garbage time touchdown by the Atlanta Falcons, and that ends up putting you in a situation where you're talking like a 17-13 victory or a 17-10 type victory and all that. So if the Saints get out to that quick start in the first half, then that allows them to come back in the second half where the defense is usually better when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. Be a defensive team, run the clock out, get through the locker room, dance and celebrate, and then get on the bus and go home. Like, I could easily see it work out that way to where the Saints are leading at halftime by multiple scores, and then by the end of the game, it's a little bit tighter, but it's only because it's like a garbage time touchdown or something like that that tightens it up, makes the game look like it was closer than it actually was. But we all know the actual story with the New Orleans Saints defense being the way that it is. That could be something that would happen, right? Where they just keep that Atlanta Falcons offense, not shut out, but shut down at least throughout the third quarter and up until the last drive of the game. They put out some reserves, and then the Atlanta Falcons get a garbage time touchdown off of it. I don't see that being a game script that is unforeseeable, right? It's not far-fetched. Now, it's a division game, which means that things can get weird, things can get wacky. We know how it goes, right? But I don't think for right now the New Orleans Saints are in a situation to where they're going to be, clawing from behind or something like that. The team to score the longest field goal. Now, this is really cool, actually. The team to score the longest field goal I thought would be Younghoe Koo, because Younghoe Koo is such a fantastic kicker. But let us not underestimate the importance of the return of the Will Lutz. New Orleans Saints are favored in that category now to kick the longest field goal in this game. That would not be the case last season. So that goes to show you just how much even Vegas understands the importance of a guy like Will Lutz. All right, y'all. Coming up later on today, on Friday, we got another episode coming for you. Trevor Sickham, my good pal from Pro Football Focus, is here. Talk about why Jameis Winston is not the same Jameis Winston in New Orleans that he was in Tampa Bay. We'll talk about his growth. We'll also break down what it is that Chris Olave brings to the New Orleans Saints and give you a super in-depth breakdown about why the Atlanta Falcons are going to be a bad team in 2022. We got that coming up for you later on today with Trevor Sickham at Tampa Bay Trey from Pro Football Focus here on Locked On Saints. So don't miss that. And again, I appreciate y'all as always making us your first listen or watch of the day. And if this is your first time catching the show, I hope you like what you saw. And I hope that you'll stick around here throughout the 2022 New Orleans Saints season, because it's sure to be a fun and entertaining one. Big congratulations to Erik McCoy, and I appreciate all y'all, as always, for being here with us. For your second listen today, make sure you go and check out that Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, wrapping it all up with the NFC East, formerly the NFC Least. Now they're bringing in a whole bunch more contention and a whole bunch more attention as well. So make sure you go and check that out on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast. Appreciate you as always making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.